Welcome to Old Testament History, Chapter 3, Session 5. Jabal Lawz, Part 1. We will reach the mountaintop tonight when everything changed and a new era began, the administration of the law. Regardless if one abides by covenant theology or dispensationalism, one must admit that when the law was given, things changed. The domestic priesthood of the patriarchal era was phased out, and the Levitical service and Aaronite priesthood took over. Things that were unwritten were written in a formal way, written as law. The children of Israel had covenanted with God at the Passover, allowing him to cross the threshold of their homes. He now was the head of their families, and they now were his people. And he guided them out of Egypt to safety with a mighty hand. Now, as the head of their houses, they were to worship him his way. They were free from slavery to Egypt. God and Israel had defeated Egypt, the greatest military power on earth at that time, and they did it without lifting a weapon. The Egyptian army and Pharaonic dynasty were dead, and they stood on the other side of the sea, and it was time to party. Exodus 15:1. Exodus chapter 15, verse 1. Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song. He is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host hath he cast into the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. The depths have covered them. They sank into the bottom like a stone. Thy right hand, O Lord, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy. And in the greatness of thine excellency thou hast overthrown them that rose up against thee. Thou sentest forth thy wrath, which consumed them as stubble. And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The floods stood upright as a heap, and the depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, and my hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind, and the sea covered them, and they sank as lead in the mighty waters. Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Thou stretchest out thy right hand, and the earth swallowed them. Thou in thy mercy hast led forth the people which thou hast redeemed. Thou hast guided them in thy strength unto thy holy habitation. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. And the dukes of Edom shall be amazed, and the mighty men of Moab. Trembling shall take hold upon them, and all the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm they shall be as still as a stone, till thy people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over which thou hast purchased. Thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountains of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. For the horse of Pharaoh went in with his chariots and with his horsemen into the sea, and the Lord brought again the waters of the sea upon them. But the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hands, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. That was a big yay, God. Look at Exodus 15:22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now, Moses was good at following directions. They asked him if he knew where he was, and he said, sure. Now, Bob Cornuck and Larry Williams, the In Search of the Real Mount Sinai guys, said that this 3-day journey amounted to 32 kilometers or 20 miles, and the children of Israel and their flocks could take their time now, going 8 kilometers a day, proceed slower, because there was no threat from Egypt anymore. However, there was another enemy, an invisible one. Exodus 15:23. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it is called Marah, which means bitter. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? All of God's people and the Christ line were in one place at one time. They were exposed in the desert in a vulnerable state. If the devil could somehow get to them and wipe them out, he'd prevent God from redeeming man, because the Christ line would be gone and the devil would win. That's why Pharaoh and his army had attacked at full strength. The Hebrews were unarmed. They could have been subdued with a smaller armed force, but the devil looked at his cards and bet all in by sending Pharaoh and his whole army, all his chariots, and all his captains, his best men. The devil wanted a massacre. Well, God outplayed the devil. The devil thought he could win with his 4 aces, but God had a royal flush, and he flushed Pharaoh and his army down the drain in the sea. After Pharaoh and his army were killed, the devil didn't give up. But we must put this in perspective, because if you had been there and seen the plagues and the pillars of fire and cloud night and day, if you had miraculously crossed the seabed on dry ground with walls of water on your right and left, if you had eyeballs in your head and ears that functioned, how sure of God's power and favor and provision should you be by then? So for anyone to doubt after that would be kind of dumb, right? Yet there were some people who doubted. There were some people who acted upon that doubt and resisted Moses and God and disobeyed. And there were some people who even went as far as that golden calf. Remember that? And they said, Behold the gods who brought you out of Egypt. Duh. I mean, big duh. How did that happen? Because every satanic spirit, every fallen angel, every foul manipulator who didn't have another assignment elsewhere was there in the desert working on them, trying every trick in the book, tempting, prodding, cajoling. And it started with the people murmuring. Subtle gripes, because the people didn't believe or control their thinking or watch their speech. But you know what? God still helped them. He miraculously healed the bitter water of Marah. Exodus 15:25. And Moses cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet, drinkable. And he made for them a statute and an ordinance. And there he proved them. Statute, that's the Hebrew word chalk, Choq, Strong's number 2706, which is something decreed, a statute, prescribed, ordinance, a law, usually applied to the positive statutes appointed by Moses, the institutions of religion and civil polity. That's from Brown Driver Briggs' lexicon. The word ordinance is the Hebrew word mishpat, which is Strong's number 4941, which means judgment or give a sentence. And then proved them. That's the word nasa. Strong's number 5254. It means to try, put to the test, or tempt. But it really, that trying is expecting either a yes answer or a no answer. And then you determine from the context which. And if the context is expecting that way, then you can translate it tempt. Next one, Exodus 15:26. This is what God proved them with, and said, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. This is one of those famous Jehovah verses. Jehovah Ropheka, the Lord our healer. One of the names of God is Jehovah or Yahweh. Jehovah is his name in English. Yahweh is what many think his name was in Hebrew. But actually, we're not sure, because ultra-religious people were afraid of mispronouncing the Tetragrammaton, that YHWH. So they avoided saying it at all, because they thought it was ultra-holy, and they were afraid of mispronouncing it. So ultimately, they forgot how it was pronounced. God, we love you so much, we forgot your name. Whew. Now, it could even be Yehovah. It could be that too. That thinking is what's behind what later became Jehovah with a J, because in early English, the Y sound was written with a J, like it still is in Spanish today. So in early English, his name was pronounced Yehovah. But then in English, the J took on its current pronunciation, and so now God's English name is Jehovah. So when I am speaking English, I'll say his name in English. When I'm speaking Hebrew, I'll say his name in Hebrew. When I'm speaking French, it'll be L'Eternel. In Deutsch, ist Gott. In German, he is God. I am not going to be legalistic and impose a law that we must speak his name in Hebrew in order to garner the most blessings, because I believe that's a slippery slope legally, because then where do you stop? Plus, there are some human languages that don't have the consonants used in the Hebrew holy names. German does not have a W sound. Greek does not have a Y or an SH sound, etc. So are those believers forever inferior because God's name to them is a shibboleth? I'll talk more about that Jehovah names in a moment. Let's go on with Exodus 15:27. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water. They are still there today. And 70 palm trees. There's a palm grove there even today. When the two adventurers Larry Williams and Bob Cornick went through there. The wells of water, the springs, have cement basins in front of them to collect the water that have been built up over the years. So they weren't there then. They were the springs when the children of Israel were there, and they encamped by the waters. And then verse 16 verse 1, they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt. So they had started, Passover was the 14th day of the first month, and the next morning they started their trip. So they had traveled 300 miles in about 30 days. Now we're not sure if that Nisan first month was 30 days or 29 days, because they were alternating in length. So they had traveled either 30 days or 31 days by now. So, but they were out of Egyptian territory and in Arabia, because that is where the real Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb is, according to Galatians 4:25. It says it's in Arabia. Exodus 6:2. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Now, this is the second murmuring, and it's stronger than the first. The whole congregation was murmuring. The adversary had been working overtime on them. Some children might say, oh, that's not fair. Some people might say, that's not fair. But folks, this is a reality in our world. The children of Israel had been thrust into a conflict between titans, the true God and the devil. When the children of Israel witnessed God's fantastic, miraculous deliverance, they were initiated into the big lead, where the competition was fierce and the consequences dire. This is the world that we live in too. We must choose side, or else become cannon fodder in the no man's zone between the battle lines. Is that fair or not? It doesn't matter. I'd rather be alive and on God's side, because after the dust clears in the final battle, we'll still be standing. But some feeble minds in Israel spoke otherwise. Exodus 16:3. And the children of Israel said to them, oh, would to God that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For you brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. But our God promised, I will become what my people need me to become, remember? So, verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove, nasa, that's that word, test them, whether they will walk in my law or no. See, there you have it literally. Nasa can be expecting a result on either side, yes or no. You see, it's a neutral word. It doesn't always mean to tempt, expecting a negative result. Right? Whether they will walk in my law or not, yes or no. See? Verse 5, and it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they shall bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. And Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening, when you shall know that the Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt, and in the morning, then you shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he hears your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that you murmur against us? And Moses said, This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, for that the Lord hears your murmurings which you murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. Ooh. And Moses spake unto Aaron, say unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he hath heard your murmurings. And it came to pass, as Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, At evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass that at evening the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, Manna, manna. Manna in Hebrew means, what is this? What is it? They didn't know what it was, so they called it, what is it? Manna. And Moses said to them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This was the real wonder bread. It built the bodies of the 12 tribes in 12 ways. Anyway, verse 16. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gather of it every man according to his eating. An omer, that's approximately 3.5 to 4 pounds, for every man. Now, they're just numbering the men here. He's taking this back to his family. All right? So 3.5 to 4 pounds of manna for every man, according to the number of your persons. Take ye every man for them which are in his tents. See? And the children of Israel did so, and gathered some more, some less. And when they did measure it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. And Moses said, Let no man leave of it till the morning. Eat it all, okay? Notwithstanding, they hearkened not to Moses, but some of them left of it till the morning. And it bred worms and stunk. Ooh! And Moses was wroth with them. And they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating. And when the sun grew hot, it melted. And it came to pass, on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Now, let's get a measurement here. If they had 600,000 men that were in the group, remember the 2 different numbers that we could get depending upon the meaning of the word thousand that I taught in the last session. So if they had 600,000 men in the group, then there would have been about over 2 million people, women and children included. So if they had 3.5 to 4 pounds for every one of those 600,000 men, that was 1,200 tons of manna every day. That would be equivalent to 55 semi-truckloads of manna every day. Or if they had only 300,000 or only 30,000 people, that still would be 15 tons of manna every day, about 2/3 of a semi-truckload a day. Either quantity was a miracle in the desert. And this did several things. First, it sustained them, but also God used it to prove them, yes or no, to test them, and hopefully get them to pass the test every time. They just had to learn to obey and to trust His word. And that's what happened for them every morning. They went out and there it was. Except on the Sabbath, it wasn't there, but the day before, there was twice as much. They saw a miracle every morning. Besides the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, okay, God was training them to trust Him. Okay? Just like He said, then you shall know that the Lord hath brought you out from the land of Egypt. See? Verse 23. And He said to them, this is that which the Lord hath said, tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you shall bake today, and boil that which you will boil, and that which remains over lay up for you to be kept until the morning. Now, verse 23 is another example of that idiom that we saw in Exodus 3:14. I will become what I will become. Aya, Asher, Aya is what it was in Exodus 3:14. Here, the you will bake what you will bake is Asher, and the word you will bake, you will bake. And then the you will boil what you will boil is Asher, and the word you will boil, and then the word again, you will boil. It's the same idiom. So you see how this implies choice. You will boil whatever you want to boil. You will bake whatever you want to bake. I will become whatever I want to become, because that's what my people need. That's God in His covenant relationship with His people. That's what Jehovah and Yahweh stands for, God in His relationship with His people. Verse 24. And they laid it up till the morning, and as Moses bade, and it did not stink on the Sabbath, neither was there any worm therein. And Moses said, eat of that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today you shall not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the Sabbath for to gather, and they didn't find any. And the Lord said to Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore He giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide you every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. But you see, this He did to prove them yes or no. See, and they were learning to trust God. He was working just like clockwork. You could trust Him. That's what He was training them. Every day they went out, there was manna. On the 6th day, there was twice as much. On the 7th day, there weren't none. Exodus 16:31. And the house of the Lord, the house of Israel, called the name thereof manna. And it was like coriander seed, white. And the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commanded. Fill an omer of it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread wherewith I have fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you forth from the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a pot, put an omer full of manna in it, lay it up before the Lord, to be kept for your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel did eat manna 40 years. How many truckloads is that? Woo! Until they came to the land inhabited, they did eat manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Now, just so you want to know, an omer is the 10th part of an ephah. You know what that is, right? Exodus 17:1. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide. This is Strong's number 7378. Contended, quarreled loudly, shouted, clamored with Moses. Now the murmuring's even worse. And said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, why are you arguing with me? Wherefore do you tempt the Lord? Tempt is that Hebrew word nasa. But James says the Lord can't be tempted. So how can that fit? Well, God was training his people to trust him. And while God was doing that, the devil was thinning the ranks too, manipulating whoever he could reach. And the murmuring now was growing louder and louder. Exodus 17:3. And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses and said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, what shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. Look how worse it had gotten. And the Lord said to Moses, now wait a minute, this is with the manna coming every morning, 6th day twice as much, 7th day none, and the pillar of cloud by day, and the pillar of fire by night, and the quails at night to boot. And still there are some people that the adversary was working on and got them to resist Moses to this degree. They were out there. This was the battle zone. And the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod, which wherewith you smote the river, take in thy hand and go. Behold, I will stand before thee upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, and the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Wow, God came through again. No matter what the circumstances, he was training his people to trust him. Well, do you trust him? The split rock at Horeb is still there today. Moses struck the rock, and waters gushed out and washed down into the depression. Most of the land there is all dirty and dusty, but there's this one spot in front of the rock, this split rock, that they said was washed clean. So they found this very unique, unmistakable rock. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And all right, can you see that? There is the split rock. You see that? That is still there today. So he hit the base of that rock with the rod, and water gushed out and ran down that hill. That's where it went into like a depression and formed a lake. Wow. And he called the name of this place Massa for temptation, and Meribah for strife, because of the contention, the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Here's another scripture on that. Psalm 95, Psalm 95, verse 6 through 9. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are his people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart, as in the provocation, as in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted, Nasa, me, and proved, Bahan, tested me, and saw my work. See, to not trust God, to not pass the test, is to harden your heart. We must stay meek to our Father. He'll take care of us no matter what. But there is a problem here, because in James it says that God cannot be tempted, neither tempts he any man. Well, that's very clear. But you have these incidents in the wilderness with the water, where it says that he tested them, same word, and then the people tempted God. Well, how can that fit? Well, remember, nasa, which is this word, can either be positive or negative. So God put them to the test, and with this stuff happening over and over and over and over again every day like clockwork, after a while the expected result was they would pass the test and they would trust God. But because of all this murmuring and all this other stuff, some people didn't pass the test, and then they turned around and they wanted to tempt God. Well, God, prove you're here. We want to see you. See, there's another verse in Deuteronomy 6 that talks about this. Deuteronomy 6, verse 10 through 16. It shall be, when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land, which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities, which thou didn't build, and houses full of all goods, which you didn't fill up, and wells digged, which you didn't dig, and vineyards and olive trees, which you didn't plant. And when you have eaten and be full, beware, lest thou forget the Lord, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Thou shalt revere the Lord thy God, and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. You shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are round about you, for the Lord thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord thy God be kindled against thee, and destroy thee from off the face of the earth. You shall not tempt the Lord your God, as you tempted him in Massah. Well, I thought James says the Lord can't be tempted, and there it says they tempted him. Well, what's the answer to that? Well, God is not temptable. He's incorruptible. So what is the answer? Well, remember those 2 pages from the beginning of Young's Concordance? That's in some of the older versions of Young's Concordance. It has those 2 pages, the hints and helps to Bible interpretation. I'm going to resubmit those in a PDF form on Way Beyond, so you can get those. If you are on Facebook, you can email me and ask for them, and I'll send them to you in an attachment. But it goes through a whole bunch of different Hebrew idioms, because Hebrew's different from English. They have a different way of speaking, and for example, one of them is the author and the agent idiom. That's when the agent does something, but it's attributed to the author. Well, that's number 7, idiom number 7. It says the language of the messenger frequently guides into that of the sender. We heard that in the prophecy tonight, where it said the Lord was speaking, but that wasn't God speaking. The people were speaking inspired by him, but the message was from him. All right? That's where the language of the messenger frequently glides into that of the sender. We get down to number 70 in the number of idioms on those 2 pages. Number 70 has several parts, A, B, C, D. We're familiar with 70b, the Hebrew idiom of permission, where it says active verbs frequently express a permission of the action. And the first example is Exodus 4:20. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, means it literally I will permit it to be hardened. But there is a number 70a, and that one says active verbs frequently express only an attempt to do the action. So that's the solution to this apparent contradiction between those accounts where people said they tempted God, but God can't be tempted. Well, they attempted to tempt him. They tried to tempt him, but God's not temptable. All right? That's that idiom. That resolves the apparent contradiction. Now, in the One God of Original Christianity class, I taught that this is part of his incorruptibility, because God is holy. He's separate. He's not of this world, because when he created the world, he couldn't be in it. He had to be from outside of it. That's the essence of being sanctified. He dwells in the most holy place, in another dimension, outside of our space-time. There, he can't be tainted with the influences of this world, because none of the things of this world can go there. Instead, he, from there, influences the world via his spirit and the actions of his angels, which he created as his agents to go back and forth between him and the world to carry out his will. But a very big difference between God and Jesus is that Jesus was tempted. That's the difference I brought out in the One Lord of Original Christianity class. We went through God's 45 traits in the One God class. Then in the One Lord class, we showed how many of them were in the all things that 1 Corinthians 15, 27 and 28 mentions, and which of them were part of the fullness that is in Colossians 2:9, that fullness of those godly traits. That's what Godhead is, it's godness, the traits of being God. So Jesus was a fullness of them, not all of them, corresponding with 1 Corinthians 15, 27 and 28. And one of the differences was God can't be tempted, but Jesus was tempted. Of course, now, one point of dissimilarity disproves identity. Jesus had to withstand temptation in order to reverse Adam's error and redeem us, but God cannot be tempted. One point of dissimilarity is all it needs to prove identity, that things are identical. There's multiple differences between God and Jesus. There also is a textual forgery regarding this concept. So while we're talking about this, I need to clear it up. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 through 13. And here it's talking about the example of the Old Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and rose up to play. They weren't playing baseball. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 20 and 3,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, it says. But that can't be, because he did not pre-exist before he was born. And that word tempt Christ, in the Greek texts, it reads the Lord, doesn't say Christ. So that's the forgery. Neither let us tempt the Lord, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. So, see, Christ had a beginning when he was born. But there are some people who want to make Christ pre-existent. But in all the major Greek texts, it reads, tempt the Lord. This corresponds to what it says in the Old Testament. So the textual scholars in Berry's interlinear, the L, Lockman, the T, Tischendorf, the TR, Tregelles, and the A, Alford, that are down in the apparatus by the footnote, are some of the texts that correct and say Christ is not there and it should be Lord. All right? But now, it started out as murmuring. Then the murmuring spread to all the congregation. And then it got stronger to contention. And they were almost ready to stone Moses. But God staved that off because they had the water, they had the quails, they had the manna, they had everything they needed. So now the adversary has to pull out another card in his deck, and that is war. Exodus 17:8. Exodus 17:8. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. That's where they were with the water. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. But when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on one side, the one on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Well, who were the Amalekites? They actually were the Hyksos that invaded Egypt. After the 10 plagues and the Egyptian army was annihilated and Pharaoh killed with no heir, remember his firstborn died too? Well, Egypt was in shambles and it was ripe for invasion, and that's exactly what the Hyksos did. And they reigned over Egypt for a long time till they were thrown out. Remember the book about the Exodus problem by Donovan Corville? That account of the Hyksos says they came in without a fight. Because the army of Israel had been, or the army of Egypt had been wiped out. See? Wow. So right when Israel was getting out of Egypt, the Amalekites learned of the Egyptian army's demise and the disarray that Egypt was in, and so they took advantage of that. So at the same time Israel was getting out, they were moving in. And apparently the Israelites had gotten some weapons off the dead Egyptians that floated to onto the seashore, enough to defend themselves against Amalek. So Moses, verse 15, built an altar, called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. This is another one of the Jehovah Names. Jehovah our banner, like a war flag to rally around. For he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, why were these Amalekites cursed? Well, it was because they were so cowardly and dirty fighters. Because even in war back then, there were some rules. and the Amalekites broke them. Instead of attacking frontally like brave men, they attacked Israel's rear. That's why Saul later was charged with wiping them out. Yeah. 1 Samuel 15:2. Samuel told him, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts." I remember what Amalek did to Israel, how he laid in wait for him along the way, the road, when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all they have, and spare them not, but slay both men and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Wow, that's dire. That's extreme. Why? Look at Deuteronomy 25:17. Deuteronomy 25:17. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way when you were come forth out of Egypt? How he met thee by the pathway and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, all the old folks, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. See, he fought dirty. All right, so, Saul, though, remember, he didn't obey. He spared the king of the Amalekites, and it names who this king was in Exodus, or in 1 Samuel 15:8. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Well, those Amalekites kept cropping up because Saul didn't do a very good job. Because later on, in 1 Samuel 30, verse 1, came to pass when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded from the south and Ziklag and smit Ziklag. That's where David's family was when they went out and fighting. And they burned it with fire. And they took the women captives that were therein. They didn't slew any, either great or small, but they carried them away and went their way. So they took David's wives. So David went and fought and won them back. All right? When Balaam gave his prophecy over the children of Israel in Numbers 24:20, he mentions Amalek. Balaam says, and when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, meaning the first of the nations that attacked Israel. But his latter end shall be that he perish forever. It was an Amalekite that actually killed Saul. And finally, who was the enemy of the Jews in the book of Esther? Haman, and it says he was an Agagite. What is an Agagite? They were related to Agag, the king of the Amalekites. Wow. So there were vestiges of the Amalekites that survived, and they had a vendetta against Israel for the rest of their lives. And Haman almost was able to act on it and have the Persians kill all the Jews in genocide. Because ever since the Jews were designated as God's people, the devil has had them on his hit list. If he succeeded in killing them, then the Messiah would not come. Well, guess what? He failed, and the Messiah did come. So why hasn't the devil left them alone? Well, the Messiah's already come. Well, the devil's so hateful, he keeps grudges, and so he still persecutes them. But guess what? Guess what? In the end, who is going to rule the world in the millennial kingdom? The Jews will. So you see God's justice? We're going to be there to help judge too, us Christians in the gathering together. And God will become whatever his people need him to become, even in the resurrection. He promised, he covenanted, and he will come through. So these are the Jehovah names that we know so far. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord our provider. Abraham knew that in Genesis 22:1, when God provided the lamb instead of Isaac his son for the sacrifice. And then Jehovah Ropheka, the Lord our healer, in Exodus 15:26, when the waters were healed miraculously. And then Jehovah Nissi, the Lord our banner, when the battle went the way of the Israelites, when Moses' hands were raised. And then there's another one that we haven't gotten to yet in Exodus 31:13, Jehovah Mekadeshkem, which means the Lord our sanctifier. See, when God said, I will become what I will become to Moses, it was not just that sentence. Men of God in their ministries are not like that. Every minister of God has a holy calling to serve God's people. And every minister that God raises up has a mission, has a message, has a method which defines their ministry. And Moses's was huge. His rivaled Jesus, who is a prophet like unto me, Moses said. So, we've met Abraham, the Zig Ziglar of Mesopotamia, and we've met Jacob, the man with the wrong moniker, because he was not the grabber. He was a plain man, a man of integrity, Tom, the Hebrew word, and wrestled his whole life against that wrong moniker, and he finally won. And so God renamed him Israel, God's winner. And we've met the unshakable Joseph, the consummate lemon into lemonade maker, who wouldn't let anything get him down, who God then saved Israel by his hand and made him the second most powerful man in the world, the Grand Vizier of Egypt, who we know in history as Menhotep. And now we meet Moses. His mother saw that he was a goodly child, Strong's number 2896, which means beautiful, excellent, remarkable. And so she hid him 3 months. And then he was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and received the best education in the world in Pharaoh's court. Then he was a shepherd for 40 years, and those are lessons in leadership. And then he saw the burning bush, and what he said about it tells us a lot about him. He said, I will now turn aside, which means from my normal path, and see, observe, give attention, contemplate this great, significant sight. Why? Why? The bush is not burnt. Moses was curious. He was seeking understanding. He wanted to know why. So he was hungry for truth. That is a snapshot of him. An intelligent, educated man who wanted to find out things. He later applied that same curiosity to God. He was hungry for the truth. He asked God questions. He wanted to know more about God. That's why he said, tell me more about your name. And then, in Exodus 33, he asked God, show me your glory. He wanted it all. He was that hungry for the truth. He mastered the principles in that Teach Me Psalm, Psalm 25. Remember, that's the Teach Me Psalm? Go ahead and read Psalm 25. And if you practice it, you will learn a little about Moses. Are you curious and hungry for the truth, like Moses was? He was a seeker of truth. Do you hunger and thirst for righteousness? Are you a seeker? Do you want to know? Well, the Bible says, you will be filled according to your appetite. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Well, that's what my ministry is. I feed seekers, and I lead cleavers. Psalm 25 says, what man is he that reverences the Lord? Him shall he teach in the way that he, God, shall choose. Moses reverenced God and wanted to know, and God taught him what he, God, wanted him to know. I'm going the same way. God's teaching me and I'm teaching you, purple smoke and all. We're going to visit Moses some more in chapter 3. We're going to see how Moses discerned God's Spirit and learn what he learned so that he could write the Pentateuch and found the 3 great religions in the world. Wow. So now we get to Exodus 18, and we are encamped at the foot of the mountain. And so here is the mountain with the top that's burned black. The mountain of Moses. Jabal Lawz. We've come to the foot of the mountain, and we're going to camp. So let's take a break. Bless you.